morning, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us this lovely, sunny, but cold Friday morning. I know you're going to enjoy the sessions today. First of all, I would like to thank the Secrétariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise for the funding of these housing webinars. That's what's made it possible for us to do. There'll be a total of 8 altogether. We're now doing session 3, and this afternoon will be session 4. As you notice that we are being recorded, so you're asked to keep your microphones closed at all times so we have a professional recording. And in approximately a week's time, it will be uploaded on our social media platform for people throughout the province to be able to access it. Without further ado, and in the meanwhile, please put your questions as you think of them in the chat box. This morning, Andrew, who is our policy and governance director, will be asking the questions of the presenter. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our first presenter, who is Janet Torge. Many of you have probably heard her name, seen her. She is the founder of Radical Rest Homes. She has also worn the hat of television documentary producer, radio talk show host, traffic reporter, Montreal Gazette columnist, and the co-founder of the first rape relief center in Canada. Radical Rest Homes was conceived about 30 years ago when she and her friends watched their parents age and did not want to end up in a senior's residence. The vision has changed and Janet has aged, but she never lost sight of the idea that seniors come in all shapes, sizes, and personalities. Their housing should be just as varied as they are. So without further ado, I would like to welcome and thank Janet for donating her time and look forward to hearing all about Radical Rest Homes and co-living.
Thanks, Ruth. Yeah, I'm used to donating my time, as many of you probably are as well. I'd like to start my presentation with a look at the big picture on senior housing. In the last little while, the last few years, we've been talking about the notion of aging in the right place. And I find this a very complicated idea. Because staying in your home might be the right place, but as we know, the older we get, it becomes isolated and actually not that healthy. Then there's the government's right place for us, which are residents, which is really only for seniors, and it can be quite expensive. And then there's your family's notion of right place, which might be not your idea of the right place. So that can sometimes cause problems. And your specific right place is often not your decision to make. There's medical factors, there's affordability, there's caretaking. All of these things go into what would be the right place for you to age. Now, lately, there's been this whole talk about alternative housing, and there's actually no lack of great ideas about alternative housing ideas. There's now co-living for millennials. We used to call it communes. Now it's called co-living for millennials. There are families that invite the older generation into their homes or in those garden suites, and some of them are quite lovely, I have to say. There's now initiatives to deal with homeless shelters and affordable housing. And as you've probably heard, there are co-housing projects across Canada. There's Co-Habitat Quebec in Quebec City. There's Harborside in BC. There's Vie en Rose, which is a cooperative in Sutton, Quebec. So we are starting to see some really nice alternative housing. We did a research report. This is one of the things I did during COVID. Like, what can you do? You're stuck in your home. And so I decided, my gosh, I am going to travel around the world and talk to people who were living in some of these alternative housing places for seniors. And we went to France, we went to Sweden, we went to London, England, the US, and different parts of Canada. And it was wonderful, I have to say. Every place I went to had a different story to tell. The interesting thing was there was only one project that I found for renters. All the projects that were internationally that were there, you had to have equity to go into them. You had to sell a house or somehow, have a big pot of money that you could throw at it. And there was one in London that had owners and renters together, but that was the only one I found. So the bottom line here is that most innovative housing for seniors, you need equity. You need to have a down payment on your alternative living choice. And this is one of the things that I have been, well, I think I'm doing it because of myself. I don't have equity and I don't want to go into a residence. So I'm off trying to find a way that we can have an alternative type of living situation without having money. So I'm looking at affordable, non-institutional housing for seniors. Now, this is something everybody wants. I never find somebody who says, oh, no, I don't want to do that. No, everybody would like some kind of alternative, but it seems very hard to get. So let's go through why it's so hard to get. First off, it doesn't fit into how we do senior housing. At the moment, the government is seeing this big tsunami of seniors coming down the pike. In fact, by 2030, 1 in 6 people in Canada will be over 65. So there is going to be a whole lot of seniors. The other reason we don't have it is because there's a thing called efficiency of scale, which is that when the bigger the project, the less the cost per unit. So that's why they build these big 300 unit residences for us, because it's cheap. And then there's the other problem with innovative housing, and that is that if you want government money to help you out, the government doesn't really take risks. They have to have their developers, their construction buddies, all of these people involved. And then the risk comes slightly down for them. But literally, innovation is risky, and so they don't want to do that. The other problem is that bringing housing on board is almost always new construction. The idea of reusing older houses is just not part of their brain set. And radical rest homes, which is our idea, is that you put a small number of seniors into these big houses in Montreal, which actually they don't know what to do with half of these because families aren't big anymore. Like there used to be all these Catholic families that had 100,000 children. And so they had to have 100,000 bedrooms. So now we've got smaller families and these houses just sit there, and they're not good for condos because it costs too much. You have to put in all the kitchens and toilets, which is the most expensive thing. You don't want to put students in there. So they sit there and people try and figure out what to do with them. So that's what we want to do. We want to take over those housings. Now let's look at the seniors, the people who might be living in any kind of housing. The thing that gets me the most about how we look at seniors is that we don't see them as unique personalities. We see them as bodies. These are bodies that have to be taken care of. If you look at society as a whole, we never see parents, teenagers, or young children as needing all the same kind of housing. They need different kinds of housing. We see them as different people that need different kinds of support. But when we become a senior, we're all the same. We're retired. We're out of touch with the latest gadgets. We're getting more support than we give. We're cranky. We're often sick, and at least we're medically compromised. We're just really bodies that need a comfortable place to be fed and serviced until we die. I know it's a horrible picture, but when it comes right down to it, that's how we're seen. So it is true, though, that getting older is a physical journey. We have aches and pains. We're shrinking. Our GP, if we have one, is probably our life partner now. But this is a time when we can pursue projects and ideas that we've never had time for. This is a time that we can mentor younger people. We can have relationships that are not just tied to work or family, but they can be tied to the passions and interests that we have. So I'm out of breath. That's the end of my big picture analysis of society. So now let's see how radical rest homes kind of fits in that picture. It's all, in my mind, it's all about the notion of co-living. We want to keep active. We want to be involved in life and community. Those are the keys to longevity. So if we co-live with people that we're sharing meals with, that we're cooking, cleaning, gardening, giving and getting support to others, that keeps us involved in life. But then we have to find people who share our values and our passions. This is one of the things, the biggest hurdle for radical rest homes is finding a compatible group, because the basic idea is that, ta-da, we're not all the same. Like when you go into a residence, they don't ask you what your personality is, and we're going to put you on a floor with other people who are big talkers, or no. They just put you in a room. Radical rest homes, we're going to figure out what is a compatible group. We're going to find people who want to be together. And then they can give each other support as they age, and it'll give their life meaning. So there are different ways that we can do this co-living thing with seniors. There's what I call the basic model, which is 5 to 7 seniors who live in a big house. They each have a bedroom. They equally share rent, food costs, housing, upkeep. Some of them have their own bathrooms, some of them don't. Sorry, we can't do that for everybody. But there are other rooms there for family visits, maybe for a caretaker when needed. And we train that group in decision-making and problem-solving techniques. So we find the group by having a bunch of people who want to live in a radical rest home go through a 10-week workshop where we all talk about how we like to live together. And during that 10-week workshop, the people who are there will, as we call it, find their 5. You'll find 5 people that you would like to live with. So that's just the basic model of radical rest homes. Then we have variations on a theme, which have come up from time to time. One of them is called houses with purpose. So it's the same as the basic model, except the residents there share life goals and experience. So, for instance, you might have a house full of aging artists, and they might actually share their space with young artists so that they can mentor them on how to live the artist life. You could have entrepreneurs living with young entrepreneurs. You could have community workers living with young community workers. So within this house, there could also be younger people to mentor. And we did a survey about 3 years ago. Well, we did it during, when we were looking for things to do during COVID, when we were all in our houses, we did a survey. And the one that came out, which I thought I hadn't even thought of it, that came out as the one that a lot of people wanted to do, is they wanted to live with an immigrant family and help that family figure out, get their lives together. find schools for the kids and, teach them a little bit about Canada. The thing that's really great about houses with purpose, of having other people, other than seniors live with you, is that when someone leaves, like the immigrant family because they found an apartment, or the young artist because she's moving on or he's moving on, is that people leave the house for positive reasons. Otherwise, one of the facts about radical rest homes or any kind of senior living situation is the residents change when someone gets too sick to stay or dies. So having a positive thing go on in the house when you have to change tenants is not a bad thing. Okay, so that's how, another variation, the radical rest home wing. This is where there's no way I'm going to get the government to stop building these big apartment buildings. I mean, they're going to go ahead and do it. But one of the things we could do is take over a wing of one of these big places and turn it into an affordable senior wing, where maybe there'd be some changes made. So we would still have separate bathrooms, but there could be bedrooms and bathrooms, but there could be common areas. And care would be taken that these projects or these large buildings are near dynamic neighborhoods, because that's the other thing about going into residences. And new construction is often out in Hellengone. And there's not a neighborhood that they're growing up around. So that's the radical rest home wing. And then finally, there's the radical rest home NORC. Now, NORC is a naturally occurring retirement community. So this would be buildings that are already here in Montreal, where the apartment building has, for some reason or other, turned into like a senior residence. So you would reorganize that apartment building so that people were more in contact with each other, and maybe talk the people who own that apartment building into getting some shared spaces and really organizing them so that they stay in touch with each other. A lot of times it happens just because you run into each other at the elevator or whatever, but it would be turning it more into, there would be more communication going on with the people in that building. So this is what we're trying to do. Now, we're making progress, but the enthusiasm from potential radical rest homers far outweighs the interest from funders, real estate, government housing people. But we fight on. We have now decided that we're going to leave all those funders behind. And what we're going to do in the next little while is that we're going to find our compatible group, and then we're just going to find a house to rent. I don't know why I always thought we needed government money. Well, I would like to get paid, but whatever. But we can do this without any money. We can just find the group and put them in a rental house. So that's what we're going to do. I mean, I have to say that my vision is that we would have thousands of radical rest homes all over Canada and the world as a really alternative to large residences. So anyway, I'm nothing if not fierce in my efforts to get off the ground. I've been doing this for about 10 years. So I don't know why I'm still doing it. It's just that I really don't want to go into a residence. And I think there's a lot of people I know who don't want to go as well. So that's it from me. Now you can have at me with your questions and comments. Thanks. Okay, I hope
Jeannie, as we mentioned, we want you to put your questions in the chat box. And I don't know, Andrew, have we received any questions yet?
We don't have any questions yet, so while I wait for them to come in, this is a really cool idea. I think this is a really neat idea.
Thank you.
I don't know if you're living in one yet, but what's your experience? Some of the user feedback we're getting from people who've been around for 10 years, people who live in them, What's the
No,
feedback you're
no,
getting?
no, I still haven't got one up.
Oh,
It's been 10 years of workshops for seniors talking about how they want to live. And when I first started it, it wasn't the idea that it is now. Like through all the workshops I've been doing with seniors, there have been, I think we're up to about 28 or 30 of them now with about 400 people, is that the idea changes as you talk more and more to seniors. But we haven't gotten one up yet because I was always waiting for funding. It's only in the last little while that I gave up on that idea. I thought the government should buy a house and we could live in it. But, they're not going to do it. So now we're just going to get a group together and rent a house. And then we'll study, it'll be the pilot project and we'll study it. So that's how it is. That my only experience is, number one, I grew up in a very large family. There were kids flying around all over the place. And I lived many of my young years in communes. And communes is basically co-living.
mhm.
So
Someone asked a question in the chat just saying, you mentioned a co-op in Southern Quebec. Can you repeat its name and tell us more about it? It was a co-op operating in Southern Quebec.
oh yeah, it's called La Vie en Rose. It's in Sutton, Quebec, and there are 5 people living there at the moment. I think it's lovely. I visited them and talked with them about it. It's a cooperative, which I think Louise is going to talk about, right? You're going to talk about cooperatives. The one thing that's different, I don't know if all cooperatives are the same, but the one thing that's different with La Vie en Rose is that in order to be there, you have to have $13,000 down payment to go into the thing. So I'm not sure. Anyway, Louise can talk more about what co-ops are, but that was how they organized themselves. Anyway, it's a lovely place. It's just beautiful.
Interesting. So I think some of the questions are coming up where I would think about costs. So the rising cost of housing,
Right.
even for rent, how do you make it work to get a rental house?
Well, this is the thing that's crazy about this idea, is that it's so cheap. Like if you go on any of the places to find a place to rent, 5 to 7 bedrooms cost $5,000 a month. That's $1,000 a month rent. Like, I mean, you can't get anything for $1,000 a month, or it's cheaper than that. Like, really, I was surprised when I looked at it, and that's why we decided we're just going to go rent a house, and do it that way. So it's very cheap. And then what you have to do is you have to share the costs of services and foods. So, I mean, with 5 people, I mean, what's it going to be? It's going to be maybe $1,100, $1,200 a month, if. So that's it. So it's really not that expensive.
Okay, and another theme of some of the questions we're getting is, through your research and through your workshops, have you found any resistance or hesitance to seniors wanting to live together? And what would you do if there's an issue amongst a group that lives together?
Okay, well, the biggest hurdle for this is finding a compatible group. Like, as you all know, all seniors are not the same. Our personalities are all different. And so I talked to a woman in Australia who is putting together compatible groups. And she asked me, this is just a little story. She asked me, she said, okay, well, how are you going to pick the people who live together? And I said, well, they're going to fill out a form, and, not a multiple choice form, but, fill out a form about living together, how much time they spend, how, what do they like? Don't they like about living together? Do they have like criteria of stuff? So she said, "Oh, that sounds good." And she said, "Yeah, and who's going to choose the group?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to look over the, the questionnaires that I get, and I'm going to figure out who can live." And she says, "And if it doesn't work, whose fault is it, Janet?" And I went, "Oh my God, okay, that doesn't work." So I said, "So what am I going to do?" And she said, "Well," she said, "what we do is that we bring people together who want to live that way. Every week we meet, and every week we have an issue of living together. Okay, who's going to cook? How often are you going to cook? What about cleaning the kitchen? What about having guests over? All these kinds of issues that come up when you're living together. And then the group, inside the group, each person is hearing what other people say, and they find their five. So they self-select the group that they want to live with. So that's what we're going to be starting the first. It's a 10-week workshop. We're going to start it in I don't know, either mid-December or early January to find the first five that goes together. So that's how it works.
Cool. And then someone had a thought there. Have you thought of asking the city of Montreal or banks for houses that have been foreclosed on? And maybe scooping them up on the cheap.
Yes, we can. I am not, if not thorough, and where I poked around to find stuff. Yeah, we are going to be working with the city, because the city has bought quite a few places which are patrimony, and those places are up for grabs for $0. And some of them even have a budget to to keep them up to date or to do all the renovations that are needed. I just have to talk to the city that we want to do this for radical rest homes, as opposed to, they usually give it to like environmental projects or education things. And so I have to convince them that it would be a good thing to do it for senior living, for an innovative senior project. So yes, we are.
Okay, so then this kind of goes well with my next question, is that, has this been done anywhere else, something similar? Like, do we have a proof of concept that this could work?
No is the easy. I cannot find it. I mean, it's so simple. You would think somebody, no, that's not true. There are people who are doing it on their own. There's a guy, oh God, I can't remember his name because I'm old. There's a guy who lives in I don't know, somewhere in Eastern Township. They have a farm, and there's a whole bunch of, like, there are seniors living there. There's it's like a compound. So that kind of thing has been done. But in all the places that I talked to during the pandemic, when I was calling innovative places, first off, hardly any of them are innovative for renters. It's all innovative for people with down payments. And I think when I found that, it may be even more like, I am going to get this damn thing off the ground, because it's not fair that people who have equity or have money also have access to alternative ideas. That's not right. So that's, I don't have anything. So we will be studying it. Whoever moves into the first place will have to accept to be studied, because we have to do proof of concept, as it's happening.
Right. And as you start developing that, someone put an interesting suggestion in the chat. As you try and make people compatible, maybe assign people with different tasks. So people who say, I love to cook, don't put them in another house with people who love to cook, so that they're not fighting over who's going to cook the meal that day. Maybe mix and match people who love to cook, and someone who loves to clean, and someone who loves to garden.
Well,
and then
they have to pick it themselves and work it out. Like, this is the thing, like, it's important, especially since we're aging, that there's not somebody telling you how to do stuff. Like, it's okay. Seniors are perfect. It's like you move into a resident and they think that they have to manage your lives. Like, I've been managing my lives for like 50 years. So it's important that we keep that ability to work things out. The people who move into the first one, or even the third or the 33rd, we will be doing like a seminars with those people on problem solving and decision making, so that there is a way that they can go about making decisions as a group. It is something that, you know, we do have to relearn because we haven't been living, you know, this way. I mean, we did it when we knew how to do it when we were younger, for anybody that lived in a commune, or, you know, as young people live together, but we have to relearn it. So we will be doing some of that teaching.
So was your first goal to try and establish these radical rest homes? The first, I can't remember what the first one's called. Then you had the second one, which is houses with purpose. Is that more of a secondary goal? Or are they
I think the first one, which will be the just the basic radical rest home, which is 5 to 7 seniors living together. We'll try and get that one off the ground first. And then after that, then that'll be a pilot project. And then we can work from there. And it also depends on who the people are and how they want to live. Like like if somebody comes to me and says, you know, I've got a bunch of friends and we've all been artists and we would like to live together, then we'll take them through the 10-week workshop, and, you know, they'll have their own house. They'll have a house with purpose. Don't you like the idea, a house with purpose? How often does anybody say, oh,
got a great ring to it. House with purpose. Yeah.
I know.
I live in a house with purpose. That sounds like a really interesting thing to say.
Exactly. Yeah. Aren't I lucky?
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, we have about 1 minute left question period. If anyone has any last minute questions to squeak in now, put them in the chat quick. If not, I will pass it over to Ruth.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. And I thank everybody for their comments. I saw comments coming in. People had different life experiences, and it's all very interesting. I always thought, Janet, when you first mentioned radical rest homes a number of years back, it reminded me so very much of the Golden Girls.
Yes. Yeah.
And I quite agree with you. I would not want to be in a housing situation where I'm told I have to go to bed at 9 o'clock at night. I want that independence.
Yes, exactly. And you should have it. You should have it till the day you die. There is no reason why we can't, you know, organize our own lives, even if we have challenges in those, you know, which we all are going to have at some point, just physically. But there's no reason why we can't make our own decisions about how we live and where we live.
Yes, I agree. Janet, thank you very much. You certainly have given us food for thought, and hopefully people will take this conversation and have it with their friends and family members. And you never know what seed is going to sprout, and maybe we can get things moving forward. And don't give up the fight. Keep it going.
I'm not giving it up. And just let me say to anybody who's interested, because in the next little while, we are going to be starting to do these workshops for people who are really interested in it. So you can get a hold of Radical Rest Homes, which is of course me, at info@radicalresthomes with an s.com. info@radicalresthomes.com.
That's great, because I think even if people have 2 or 3 friends and want to go into this further, it would certainly have value to attend the workshops, because it's going to give us different aspects to consider and be prepared and more informed as we move forward. Janet, I thank you ever so much. Really appreciate you doing this for us. And without further ado, I'm not sure where I am with time. I'm right on the button, just about. I'm going to introduce our next presenter, and that is Louise Constantin, who has devoted most of her life, both personally and professionally, to social and cooperative housing. She is a founding member of the Verdun Citizens Action Committee. Oh, we're going back a few years, Louise, with that one. And FRAPU, as well as the Fédération des Coopératives at the Habitation de Montréal Métropolitain. She has worked in 2 resource groups and later coordinator of the largest cooperative in Canada. Imagine this, 865 units. The Village Cloverdale Cooperative in Pierrefonds, and several of you on Zoom this morning can relate to Cloverdale, as an advisor in associative and political affairs. She is now a consultant with the, now let me get this right, Fédération des Habitations Coopératives du Québec and other organizations. Louise also sat on the board of directors of Rooftops Canada Foundation, which enabled her to be a delegate to the United Nations Habitat 2 conference in Istanbul in 1996. So as you can very well see, she's a wealth of information. We've all heard of co-ops. We know they exist, but how do you get in one? How do they function? Where are they? And I'm looking very much forward to hearing your presentation, Louise. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it quickly over to you. And please, let's get those questions in the chat box in advance. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's the second time, and I'm always very glad to be able to present and promote the cooperative model in housing. I think I have the cooperation of Rob to show the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation. Thank you. Yes. So we can go next. Oh, I said the 24th. So yes, you mentioned the Fédération. It was the older name, the Federation of Housing Cooperatives of the Montreal region finally expanded to become the Federation of Québec Housing Cooperatives. My presentation will deal with what is a housing cooperative, who can and does live in a co-op, participation, the key word, some challenges, the same as we are dealing with here, how do you say that? Ageism and universal accessibility, the alternatives, and probably what most people want to know, how to join a co-op. Thank you. Next. So the Federation was founded already in 1983, so it's celebrating its 40th birthday this year. It includes in its territory 628 housing co-ops, and which corresponds to 13,000 units. And I did a research once to figure out what town could have such a population, and I ended up with Val d'Or. So as you see, it's quite a large community, and you have a variety. The smallest co-op is 3 units, and the largest one is the Village Cloverdale in Pierrefonds, which you mentioned. I can say that 3 units co-ops won't exist anymore. That belongs to the past. Generally now the average co-op has less than 24 units, but that's a trend that is changing now. What does the Federation do? Mostly like any association, it's advocacy and political representation for housing co-ops, but it also provides services to co-ops directly, like training, management, and technical support, information, group purchasing plans, etc. Next. So, what is a housing co-op? Mainly, it's an association of people. It's the people that form co-ops. And those people are looking for adequate housing at a reasonable price. It's governed, it has its own act, the Quebec Cooperatives Act, and it's the same act that cover all sectors, all co-op sectors. So you have workers co-ops, agricultural co-ops, name it, it's the same act for all co-ops. It's based on collective decision-making in general meetings, electing a board of directors responsible for regular management and sometimes can be supported by staff in large co-ops, and mostly active members' involvement in committees. So those committees can be finance, secretariat, selection, maintenance, community life, community involvement, etc. Thank you. Next. What is participation? All my life, I've been challenged by the idea that if you live in a co-op, you have to wash the floors. I don't know where it comes from, but it can happen, but that's not the main motivation. And the participation is mostly in collective decision making and time sharing. And time is seniors' main asset. Yes, that was mentioned before. And if needed, there can be alternatives for tasks like exchange of services, like twinning or accorderie. I don't know whether it still exists. I don't know whether you know about accorderie. It was an initiative of people being able to exchange like services. I mean, I can type and someone can help me with, I say anything, repairing my bike, for instance, you know, but I don't know whether it still exists. But mainly the idea of participation is distributing tasks according to people's skills, availability, interest, and ability. For instance, mentorship, planning and coordinating biannual chores or the co-op party, being available to greet and oversee maintenance professionals, etc. So what I'm trying to explain is that being in a co-op is not necessarily, it can, but it's not necessarily physical tasks. I mean, it's management tasks. It's belonging to an association of people who are there to manage an immovable property. So, depending on the size of the co-op, of course, you can have a variety of tasks. But the main idea is that if you join a co-op, you are a member of an association and you have to collaborate, you have to take part in the functioning of the association. So it's the main difference. I mean, that's what describes co-ops in comparison with other types of housing for seniors. Next. No, so the keywords are democracy. In a co-op, one member equals one vote. So everyone has an equal share, an equal weight in the decision-making process. It's the collective ownership. The co-op as a corporation owns the buildings. So often people will say, well, who is the owner? As I mentioned, it's an association of people incorporated under the Cooperatives Act, and the association is the owner of the land and the buildings. So the idea is then when you join a housing co-op, you have two statuses. You have one which is a member and you sign a member contract, which tells you what are your rights and obligations. And you also sign a lease because you are a tenant in a co-op. So you don't have to provide equity. You don't have to finance. You finance through your rent. Next. Okay, and if you leave, well, you leave as a tenant, so you don't have any obligation, and you don't have a share in the capital, because the co-op belongs to the association, not to the individuals. And who lives in a housing co-op? Well, that's interesting for us here, because the trend shows that more and more, and with the demographic evolution of our society, you find more and more seniors in housing co-ops. So you have the types of household, it's still mostly families and single people. The average income is $31,936 compared with $76,500 for the population. So sometimes you will hear, oh, well, there are people who earn a lot of money and live in co-ops. You may, but that's not the trend. As you see, co-ops are there to provide housing for people who need affordable housing. 61% are women and 39% are men. The average age was 47 years in 1996 to 54 in 2017. But then the proportion of retired people is 35.7%. So you see that for seniors, it's a model that is quite attractive, and yes, thank you. Next. And this is a growing trend. The proportion in the past 35 years, the proportion of co-op members in the 55 to 64 age group has gone up from 11% to 22%. And the proportion of co-op members in the 65 plus age group has gone up from 13 to 30%. Next. Still, there are issues related to age and to perception, and you will recognize a quote that I found in your site, a feeling of once I reach that magic age of 65, I am put out to pasture and any value I had is gone. And one of the issues that aging members in co-ops have begun to face is that many people are pioneers, they are the founding members, and as the membership evolves, well, there is sometimes a more open message that then you should leave and go to elders' homes and leave your apartment to younger ones, and we need arms and we need new blood and blah, blah, blah. And well, you may imagine that this is not well received as a message. So some members in the Fédération, this is the Cité Co-op, it's our magazine, and there were issues that were dedicated to this issue already. And this brought, next picture, this brought some members to, next. Oh, well, I was going forward to vote in the Federation's general meeting to form a seniors committee and address those issues. So the idea is to find a balance between values, needs, and resources. So we always say that co-op values are based on equality, solidarity, mutual aid, and recognition towards the pioneers, and the needs of co-ops to have tasks to be performed and collectively save on the rent. So the more the members do, the less they have to raise the rent. Of course, co-ops are already free to hire people to perform some tasks, but the early co-ops that were smaller, well, the members performed a lot of tasks and like washing the floors, as I mentioned. So resources, if less members are available to perform physical tasks, this increases the burden for the others. Is that true? No. Okay, next. So this is what I mentioned. That was there was a resolution at the Federation's 2018 annual general meeting to create a seniors committee within the Federation with the mandate of find means to ensure co-op's ongoing sustainability, which is more or less the transmission of the information and the expertise in co-ops, document and analyze situations met by seniors and put forward solutions, tools, and actions to address them with governments and community organizations as well, and develop partnerships and look for financial and technical resources. And that may seem a bit abstract, but we'll see how it was translated concretely. Yes. So the first thing that the committee did was to apply for a grant from the Federal New Horizons program under the title of Seniors as Transmitters of Knowledge, which the committee got. So with this funding, they organized panels with the support of professionals specialized in senior issues. They held discussion groups with seniors living in different housing co-ops. They created a dedicated section in the Federation's website, which you can see there. And they planned the development of a toolkit to equip co-ops in order to address the issues surrounding the aging of their members. Next. The other challenges, of course, is universal accessibility. We know that 1 person out of 3 will face or some sort of accessibility issue in his or her life. And the older co-ops, they were developed in existing housing. So we know that Montreal is proud of its care. Les escaliers de Montréal. So this is a major issue, but we'll see that next. Now there are some co-ops for seniors only, very few. So you have Émile Nelligan, 142 units in Mercier, which is the east end of Montreal. Rêve Bleu, 19 units in Verdun, but for women only. Havre du Petit Village, 100 units in Repentigny, Le Train de la Vie de Montagne. But the growing trend is for multi-generation, oh, that's hard to say, multi-generational co-ops. So I can quote one in Rosemont and Bois-Hélène in Laval. This is the picture that you see here is Bois-Hélène in Laval. Next. So, well, when we say, I'm going to repeat it, multi-generational co-ops, you understand that you have co-ops that recruit members among seniors, among families. Yes, Cloverdale did that too. Actually, Cloverdale managed to develop, they started with 250 units and then they acquired more buildings, and they also built new buildings. So they build buildings adapted for seniors and also accessible for people with disabilities. So and now you have well, it existed in the legally, but now it's a growing trend as well, what we call solidarity co-ops. Well, the difference is that in, I would say, regular co-ops, 100% of the members are residents. In solidarity co-ops, you can have 3 categories of members. Of course, the residents, but all the employees when you see big co-ops like Cloverdale and others, well, you have employees to contribute to the management and community representatives as well. So very often these community representatives, community organizations, they are there to provide services, meals, social activities, support for particular needs. So this is a new trend, a growing trend, especially because new co-ops now are much larger. As Mrs. Thorne mentioned, you have the efficiency of scale, which is an issue nowadays with the cost of construction. So that allows for co-ops that can be adapted to a variety of residents. English-speaking co-ops, well, there are not so many. The best bet to find them is in areas where you have an Anglophone population, like in Côte-Saint-Luc, Côte-des-Neiges, Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, and Pointe-Saint-Charles. Next. How to join a co-op in existing co-ops. Well, that's not easy because, of course, we know that we have a housing crisis, and even in the private market, it's difficult to find a dwelling. And it's even more difficult when you have dwellings at an affordable rent in co-ops and non-profit organizations. But the way to do that, if you want to find, to apply to a co-op, you find that in the website of the Fédération. Under the, you see here, you can figure out in what neighborhood you want to live. and then you have a list of co-ops, and you can send a letter of application. Not only mentioning your needs, but mostly mentioning what you can contribute to the co-op. What is your motivation and what you are ready to do. If you have any kind of expertise in, I would say, accounting, Secrétariat, or whatever management, the more you say, the better it is. But there are long waiting lists. I have to be frank with you, because with the housing crisis right now, of course, there is a big burden for co-ops. Next. Perhaps it would be easier to contact a resource group to be informed of developing projects and join a project which is in development. What is a resource group? Well, these are non-profit organizations that were funded in 1976 to accompany groups of people who want to develop co-ops or non-profit housing. You can find the list in the website that is listed here, and become a member of a developing co-op and take part in the process. But I have to be frank as well that it can be a long process, because the funding is not very generous, and what is important is to put pressure on our political representatives to have significant investments in social housing. That's the main difficulty right now. Some co-ops, it takes 5-10 years to develop because the funding is quite limited. So I hope it. I'm ready for your questions. There are a lot more to say, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. This was very informative, and it's a whole area of potential opportunity for people to access and also be very active and participate and maintain their skills for reasonable priced rent. It's sad to hear that government doesn't see the value and put more funding and assistance into helping people to set them up. So Andrew, once again, we're going to go through the process. I hope people have been putting questions into the chat box, or if they had comments that they elaborated so that Andrew can read the concept that you're trying to get across. Andrew, have you any?
Yeah, I have some questions, and I just want to say thank you so
Great.
much, Louise. That was a super informative presentation. I was writing down questions, and as you kept going, you kept answering my questions. So just eliminated the need for that. But let me start with one of the first ones I got. How do co-ops differ from condos, let's say? Because you're
I'm
seeing
sorry?
a rise, you're seeing a rising trend in the building of condo units. How do co-ops differ from condo units?
Well, in a condo, each individual is, well, is the owner of his or her unit. In a co-op, as I mentioned, is the co-op as a corporation that
Okay.
is the owner. And the people, as long as they are members in the co-op, they have, I would say, the collective ownership duties, but they don't have the financial investment in the co-op. They are tenants in the co-op. Whereas in a condo, the people are owners.
So would there be difference? I know like in condos, there's association fees. Would that be the same thing in a co-op? Would you have a fee for the co-op or no?
Well, you have some which is in every co-op, like Desjardins or whatever. When you join a co-op, you have a social share to contribute, but it's very limited. It's like $100, $200 at all. So you don't have to put in equity. You are a tenant. You sign a lease, and it's the same lease as a lease in the private market. But you also have a member contract that tells you what are your rights as a member and your obligations. And your obligation is to take part, to participate in the management of the co-op.
Okay, because then I think one of the slides talked about performing tasks. So is there a benefit if you perform tasks? I think you said there is a decrease on your rent. Is it kind of if you perform tasks, you pay less? How does that work?
Well, actually, yes, I would say that most co-ops, I mean, when a co-op wants members, and they normally 100% of the people living in a co-op are members. So in your contract, it can say that the market rent would be, I say anything, $1,000. But given the fact that you're a member, you have a rebate that brings down your rent to, I say, $800, for example. Yes. But then, I mean, it can happen. It was mentioned in the previous presentation. What happens is if things don't go well, a member does not participate or is, well, has problems with the co-op, well, the member can lose his or her membership, and then the rent will be the rent that is the market rent. But that's really that's not common. Let's say it's like something that has been thought about previously to make sure that the obligations are well understood.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna switch gears to something you were saying towards the end, and the lack of development of co-ops. Who's responsible for that? Who should be developing co-ops? Do municipalities have a role? Like, how do these come about, and why are they not coming about anymore?
Well, that's a tricky question. Well, actually, let's say that at first, and it was mentioned in the chat, the federal government in the early years, it was the golden era, and if I had not lived it, I wouldn't believe it now. The golden era was in the 80s when the federal, the provincial, and the municipal levels of government all contributed to the development of co-ops. And that contributed to renovating a lot of old buildings in neighborhoods. In 1993, the Mulroney government stepped back and decided to stop its investments. So that was a big blow. And the Quebec government, I think of all provinces, eventually in 1996, created its own program that was called Accès-Logis. The problem is that the financing did not follow the rise of costs and was not indexed since 2009. So that's why it was more and more difficult for co-ops to manage to develop, and it often took many years to manage. Sometimes co-ops took 10 years to finally develop, and it did not go better with the new government. But of course, with the Liberals, they started what they call the National Strategy for Housing in 2018. But most of the funding went to the private market, not the nonprofit market. Well, we had some good news this month that finally the federal and the provincial government decided to match funding, 900 million for each level to invest in housing. But still, we don't know precisely in what type of housing. So this is an ongoing political battle to convince the governments to reinvest significantly in nonprofit and co-op housing, and public housing as well, because there are no more public housing developed either.
So to kind of follow up on that question, even if there's money available to build a co-op, is it difficult to find an appropriate location, given that cost of land, let's say in downtown Montreal, has greatly increased as it was when they were building these in the 80s? Like the gentrification of neighborhoods, does that make it difficult for saying let's put a co-op right here in NDG, whereas the land now costs millions of dollars to build anything here?
I would say in French you have oui, yes, because the city of Montreal and actually I would say the good news. I don't want to be very negative. There are some good news. The municipalities have become very proactive with housing, and because, well, they are the ones that face the housing crisis in the first place, especially with the rise of people with no sans-abri. No, I'm sorry, my vocabulary is lacking me. People living in the streets. And the city of Montreal has voted what is called a preemption rule, that the city can itself buy land and make it reserve it for the development of housing projects. So this is something helpful. But again, if the financing from Quebec is not there, you may have a piece of land waiting for you, but then you have to find the money to develop it. So, but it's slow, it's hard, but it's still happening. It's just that we have to continue to put pressure to have appropriate funding.
Interesting. And then as you build a co-op today, do rent increases happen gradually in a co-op, or as the cost of living increases? Like, how does that work? Or is it like a fixed rate for X amount of years, or can tenants get after 1 year get a surprise and your rent's gone up 20% like they do sometimes in apartment buildings? Or
well, as I mentioned, and I really insist on that, co-ops are managed by their members. So in the members, and they have a finance committee, and it's the members that decide on the rent. Well, of course, if I say that they decide, they cannot decide that if the tax is raised, if the maintenance, you need to maintain your buildings, and you may have other costs, well, the rents are fixed according to the cost. But what is the difference with the private market is that you don't have a profit component in the rent increase.
Okay.
Your rents increase according to the needs and not according to the market, the speculative market. But it's the members that fix their own rent.
So given that there's no profit to be made, what has been the is there pushback from developers from wanting to build co-ops? Is there pushback from the community from having a co-op built in their area? Is that part of the problem? How do you balance that? How do you make that work?
I'm not sure I understand your question, but it opens the door to another information that the City of Montreal has adopted what is called the 2020 regulation, that which purpose was to bring private promoters to include social housing in their development. The purpose was good, but recently this regulation now is under study, because what happened is that there's only one project that was developed according to this regulation, because mostly promoters, developers prefer to pay a financial contribution rather than include social housing in their development. So that was a good intention, but now the regulation has to be adapted to be able to reach its purpose.
And is there any, just a second, you answered part of my question appropriately, but the second part was, is there any ever community pushback from the development of a co-op in a neighborhood?
It may happen. I cannot say that it's not the case, but I wouldn't say it's generalized, because actually I think most people realize that the housing crisis is so, you see your neighbors leaving because they can't, especially seniors. I would say seniors are the main victims of gentrification. I can see it in my own neighborhood. Seniors are pushed back, and they're victims of how you call that, renovictions, and they are very often victims of when a building is sold and the new owner wants to raise the rent. So I think that people realize that, yes, you need social housing to prevent gentrification.
Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat right now, and you've answered questions for about 20 minutes already. Anybody have any other questions? We're a bit ahead of schedule, but
Well, that's okay, because we have another afternoon session starting at 1:30, and I know Louise wants to get to Gatineau, so I guess things happen for a reason, so it's not a bad thing. Louise, thank you very, very much. This has been most, how can you register for living in a co-op is a question that's just come in. And is there any developer that is co-op free, I guess is the word? Any answers for those two questions, Louise? How does one apply to get into a co-op? Oh, is there any developers that are super friendly or supportive of co-ops?
Well, there are, yes, I can say that there are some that at the beginning really wanted to include the co-ops in their development. But again, I'm repeating myself, if I have a message to provide, is the government funding has to be there, Because even when you have a project like in Radio-Canada, for instance, where there were some social housing that were supposed to develop on the site, we're waiting for the developers want to develop now, not in 5 years from now. So this is the main problem.
And then I guess to apply is to go on a website and see what the listings are for cooperatives.
Yes, this is the way, and there are also some information workshops that are provided by the Federation on how co-ops work and how to apply. But again, there are some long waiting lists. So it's better to try to join projects that are being developed and to make sure that you are part of it.
Andrew, the last question, I think a last one came in if you want to ask it. I don't see it anymore.
Yeah, there was one. Do you need to pay the same property taxes in the same way for a cooperative as in a private condo?
I'm sorry, I laugh because I've been working on that, especially this week. Actually, when I said that the Federation did advocacy work, this is one of the issues that the Federation is dealing with. The answer is yes. Co-ops pay the same level of taxes as in the private market. And we've been working for years to convince the government that that was unfair, because co-ops have a social mission and they are not speculative. And but right now, actually, the stars are well aligned, because the government is working on the project 39 on the city taxation. It's la loi sur la fiscalité municipale. And we just this week, the Federation presented a brief to again try to obtain from the Quebec government that non-profit housing and co-op housing be considered as a special category for the purposes of taxing. But that's an issue, because this is an aspect that contributes to having rents increase in co-ops, and you just cannot say, well, I don't want such an increase. Well, you have to pay your taxes, so that's the point.
Sort of defeats the purpose of the concept. Louise, thank you ever so much. This has been tremendously informative. I'm sure everybody agrees. Now we are going to be shutting down, coming back for those who have registered for the afternoon session at 1:25. So you have a bit of a break. I will highlight that this was recorded, and you will be getting the copy and a link in your email for all of you who registered. And it'll be going out in about a week's time. There is a survey link. I don't know if it's in the chat box yet, but it'll also go, we'd like you to complete it. It'll also be going out with the link and the copy of the recording. Please take the 2-3 minutes to answer that survey and send it back by SurveyMonkey. Because that's information we need for our funder to show that we did do it, that people were pleased with the information. It also tells us that there's something that we need to do differently. So I thank everybody for joining us, staying with it. I hope you found it as informative as I did. And we'll see those of you who registered back again at 1:25. So thank you very much. Andrew, thanks for all the questions. Rob, thanks for all the technical support. And Janet, if you're still here, thank you once again. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.